Hi, I'm Dr. Liz Carter, and welcome to part 3 of my 3-part series, Figuring Out Your Food Allergies. Now, if you missed part 1, which is all about what food allergies actually are and how to test for them, and part 2, which is all about my favorite way to treat food allergies, you probably want to go back and check those out first. Today, we're going to cover the most common mistakes I see people make when they try to treat their own food allergies and what to do about that. Okay, thanks so much for joining me. We are in our third and final part of our Figuring Out Your Food Allergies series. Part 3, the most common mistakes people make when dealing with their food allergies. So we want to jump into some of the common myths or difficulties that people have with food allergies, sensitivities, and intolerances. What comes along with that in terms of treatment. In video 1, we covered what the allergies are and what sensitivities and intolerances are. In video 2, we talked about the main free treatment to do that you can do on your own, which is the elimination diet. And here I want to cover the common mistakes that happen on the elimination diet, but also just in general when dealing with food sensitivities and intolerances. So let's dive right on in here. Okay, so we'll cover why you shouldn't go cold turkey, which might be confusing, but I will explain that in a little bit here. Why partial elimination doesn't work. This is a big one. Cheating with food and time, how to handle that, what happens when it comes up for people, because it almost inevitably will. Missteps in reintroduction. This is a big one. In video 2, we talked about reintroduction, which is the least talked about part of the elimination diet, and again, not essential to do, which we'll talk about a little bit more here when we deal with the missteps that come up. But an important part of the diet to address that often just is not addressed. And then trusting testing, and what I mean by testing is the allergy tests that you would get done at the office of a Western medical doc, so like the skin testing or RAST testing, or the food sensitivity tests that you often take with a naturopath or that might be available online right now. I've seen a few ads for them, but I haven't checked them out. So, which is interesting, your own little test kit. Plus, my number one piece of advice, because let's face it, dealing with food sensitivities and intolerances is really, really challenging. It often challenges our deepest beliefs about ourselves, as crazy as that sounds, but food is really tied to the core of us. It can be tied into family structure, where food is nourishment, food is love even, which, then it has a lot of emotional connections and pieces tied to it there. It's just a really challenging thing for us to look at. And a lot of times while we're on the diet, it can be challenging for other people to accept that we're trying to make these changes. That's one of the most challenging things, I think, is that other people will sometimes take these changes we're making personally if you decline, wanting a brownie or, that ice cream or whatever it is that's offered at social gatherings. So it's a challenging process to navigate. It involves not just the physical issues with food and allergy elimination, but mental and emotional, very deeply rooted. And for most people, at the core of food allergies is really looking at self-worth and am I good enough, right? It ties all back into self-care, because looking at food sensitivities and intolerances, and sorry, I know I just said allergies there, I generally mean sensitivities and intolerances, is really looking at this core piece of how can I take care of myself better, right? If I've got something that's irritating, it needs to come out, right? I need to heal. I need to allow my body to do that. But most of us have a lot of really intense hang-ups about actually allowing ourselves that. Whether it be we don't believe we can heal, we don't believe we should feel that good, we don't believe we should make the time for ourselves to actually make that process that other people are more important. All of those things come into dealing with food allergies. So there's this huge mental and emotional piece that should not be discounted. It should be something that you are prepared for when you go into food allergies. And I think it's not an often talked about piece, and I kind of should have put it on, you know, what we'd cover, but we're covering it right now. So I think that's a big part of it. Don't underestimate that piece, and you know, it might even inspire you to get some counseling, get some support, make sure your family's on board. You know, oftentimes the allergy elimination stuff or food sensitivities and intolerances is much easier to do if other people in your household are doing it along with you, or if you live alone, you know, to have a buddy kind of help you out with it, because it can be very tough if you're not the one who mainly controls the food. Maybe you're not the cook in the family, or you've got kids and you're worried about, I have to make one meal for myself and a meal for them. You know, it can just be really tough, and those are all important things to think about ahead of time. So, all right, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, so why don't we jump into this first common issue that people have. So, going cold turkey. So by cold turkey, I don't mean taking everything out, because that's exactly what you want to do. By cold turkey, I mean, you know, maybe you're watching this video series and we're in the last one and you're like, okay, I am kind of pumped. I get it. I'm going to get the books. I'm going to go through with this. But before, you know, those take a while to get here from Amazon or wherever I order them. So I'm just going to dive in. I'm going to do this tomorrow. You know, I can't stand it anymore. I've clearly got things that need to be addressed. Let's do it. I love the enthusiasm. It's amazing and fabulous, but it often is, you know, ill-fated, because this type of thing requires these big, massive changes, and that does not happen overnight as much as we want it to. So instead of channeling that enthusiasm towards like just doing it overnight and diving in, and then you end up tomorrow just eating like lettuce and carrots and random pieces of, I don't know, nuts or something, you know, because you have nothing to eat, channel that enthusiasm into some planning. So, right, we can see that with this cold turkey, just diving in immediately, we get this lack of planning that happens. We don't know what we're doing. We don't have anything to eat. Again, when we dive into the elimination diet, we quickly realize that almost every convenience food we've relied on, even the ones at natural grocery stores, are kind of off the table, because they almost always have some sort of allergic or sensitivity contamination. Things that are dairy-free will have gluten or egg or soy. Things that are gluten-free commonly have eggs, among other things, or dairy. So it's really important to plan ahead, to make sure you would just want to set yourself up for success, because it can be really demoralizing if you're feeling great and enthusiastic, you know, and then you don't plan ahead enough and you kind of fall off the wagon within 2 or 3 days because you're kind of calorically starved, because you've barely eaten anything, and then you feel like you're a failure, or the elimination diet is a failure. And really it's just backing it up, taking some time before you dive in to really get your ducks in a row, right? So we don't go towards this overwhelm and then failure. This just, oh my God, I don't know what to do. I don't even know what to buy at the grocery store anymore. I don't know how to put recipes together, and then falling off the wagon immediately, you know, and sometimes it's really difficult to just pick yourself right back up pretty quickly after if you've fallen off the wagon. So again, we really want to plan carefully. That extra time and effort you take will pay off in spades. You know, channel all that enthusiasm into researching recipes, coming up with grocery lists, you know, talking to your family about what this can do, talking to your kids about like, oh, what's something you might like to eat? You know, here we are, like getting those menus really thought out and planned, and coming up with breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, all of this. You know, it's a massive, or can be a massive overhaul, because oftentimes these foods that we have sensitivities or intolerances to are really in our diet 3 meals a day, maybe even more. So it's really, really important just to take your time and make an effort for yourself. It will lead to much more success for you. Okay, so let's move on to the second mistake that people make. So we've got partial elimination. So partial elimination is something that I see really commonly. It happens quite a bit when people don't take everything out that they should because it seems easier, right? Where it's like, I can't handle taking gluten out right now, so I'm just going to take dairy out, and maybe eggs, that type of thing. So this is fine if you eventually reach that mark where everything is out at the same time. And then you start your clock then for that 6-week time period. However, a lot of people will just take things out partially and then they won't feel that much better, and then they'll say, oh man, this didn't work for me. I don't know what the deal is. So what happens with partial elimination is that there's residual inflammation. So if we think about it where we've got this baseline of inflammation right about here, and then we've got this inflammatory load that we're carrying around with all these things we're sensitive to or intolerant of. And let's say, we take dairy off the top and that lowers us to this amount, but we still got all of this inflammation left. And then that's when we decide, I don't feel that much better. This isn't working for me. I'm clearly not sensitive to dairy. When really, you lowered the inflammation load, but you didn't lower it enough to get it back to baseline. And that's why this full elimination of everything that you think you could be sensitive to is so crucial. You have to reset the baseline inflammatory load. And then that's also what happens when you've done that for the reintroduction picture. It's much clearer. You have a stronger response because your inflammatory load is so much less. If you eat something that you're sensitive to or intolerant of, your body is going to let you know most of the time. Again, that depends on the severity of the intensity or intolerance. And that's why, again, food allergies can be so complicated, because sometimes it's very obvious and other times it's not. And you only become sensitive if you eat it every day for a week or two. And that's a lot more subtle and more difficult to figure out. So it takes some time to really move through all of this. So of course the solution is to commit to that full elimination for yourself, right? And that's why the planning is so important. Just go ahead and do it. Make sure that you really are going to take out everything that you want to take out. And again, in video number 2, we kind of covered the list of common things that I recommend, and a list that one of my favorite books called The Elimination Diet recommends that you take out, which is a bit more comprehensive. And again, you can do it over time. You don't have to take everything out all at once, but you do have to get to the point where it is all out for at least 6 weeks or until those symptoms come down and aren't present anymore. Assuming those symptoms are related to food allergies, and that's why it takes a lot of patience and a lot of learning to listen to yourself, understanding what symptoms have gone away and how you're feeling. And that's why it's very nice before starting the elimination diet to write down all of the things you're experiencing. And that is only kind of a partial solution sometimes, because a lot of times these things are things that we've adapted to. We don't even pay attention to them anymore, or we don't realize, how tired we are, or that our joints are aching all the time. And then once the foods are gone, you can feel the difference, and it's like, oh, okay, all right, I was dealing with that. And that's kind of the magic and wonderfulness of discovering your sensitivities and intolerances if you have them. Okay, so yeah, definitely no partial elimination. You gotta go full bore there. So cheating with food or time is another really common mistake people make. So what I mean by that with cheating with foods would be, let's say you've done a really good job, you've done the full elimination, you've taken everything out, it has not been the 6 weeks, and you're like, I'll just do a little dabble of that there, and maybe it is the pure food, maybe it's just a little bit of wheat bread, or just an egg, or whatever it is, and you're like, oh, that's totally fine, no big deal, and really, unfortunately, that does muddle what your results are, because your body in that 6 week time period is still cleaning up those inflammation levels. And when you keep pinging it with this food that causes inflammation, it's going to delay that cleanup, right? It's going to take more time and resources for your body to clean up that inflammation rather than heal your GI lining, right? And really, especially in that first video, like we talked about, if there's leaky gut that's developed, it takes time for that membrane to heal and to seal back up. And if you keep pinging it with stuff that irritates it, it's just going to continue to be leaky. And then you're not going to get the results that you're looking for. So what I'm trying to say here is it really does matter that it's clean and that it's out for 6 weeks. And, if there is a slip up, okay, great. You're human. That's probably going to happen. Maybe there's a social event. Start the clock over and then move forward from those 6 weeks. It really can make a difference and clarify things for you down the road. So the cheating it really does matter. It spikes that inflammation back up. You might have symptoms come back immediately, you might not, because your body's still cleaning up the rest of that inflammatory load, so it's kind of masked. That response could be masked by the rest of the inflammation that's still there, which is why it's confusing. If you have a little bit of something and you're like, oh, I'm totally fine, that must not be a problem. Again, that inflammatory load has not come down to that new baseline yet. It's kind of slowly working its way down. So, and then cheating with time is kind of what I was talking about before, where you're just not going that full 6 weeks. You're like, oh, I can't make it. It's too much. It's too hard. And that, unfortunately, is this short-term thinking or mindset, right? Like, maybe like a cleanse or a diet, or whatever. I'm just going to give it a shot for a month and then be done with it. It really has to be this larger lifestyle change. And this really gets into that mental, emotional piece I was talking about, where you are challenging your deepest beliefs about yourself, whether or not you deserve to heal, whether or not you deserve to feel better. And this is a very, very common form of self-sabotage. All of these mistakes are. That you will go towards in order to prove to yourself, I can't do it, or I can't feel better, or I can't heal. And you absolutely can, but that's why this lifestyle change is so challenging, right? Because it's dealing with all of these issues all at once. It's a massive learning process, and it's really difficult. And I feel for you. I've done this several times myself in many ways and been incredibly frustrated and haven't been listening. And then, when I do, it clears itself up and I'm like, wow, why did that take me so long? Everybody has kind of hang-ups about this, about themselves. So it's really important to realize that you're not alone. It's a struggle. There's going to be a lot of journaling, a lot of emotional processing to move through this well. So the solution is to commit and plan for the long term, right? Are you sensing a theme here? It's basically telling yourself, I am worth this effort, right? I am worth figuring this out. I am worth feeling good. And again, you're human. This might happen. So just restart the clock, just go for it again. And the nice thing is that, if you end up with cumulatively more than 6 weeks, 6 weeks totally clear, but maybe it takes you like 9 or 12 weeks, that's great. That's going to get you even better results if you choose to do the reintroduction. So it's exciting. It can only lead to good things that way. Okay, all right, let's take a look at the next one here. So this is a big one. Missteps in reintroduction. There are a lot of ways reintroduction can go wrong, which is why it's the hardest part of the diet usually. And then it's also not necessary to do. Again, as we talked about in video 2, if you're feeling good and you'd rather not mess with it, more power to you. Awesome. Just stay away from things. If you've committed to that and you feel okay with that and you're fine turning things down at social function or bringing your own food, which is a reality for most elimination diet issues, then that's great, but if you feel like you want to introduce, if you want to know for sure, again, it's kind of variable, and you might have to reintroduce it a few times and really be patient with it. Then it can be worthwhile to go ahead and do. So, so one of the issues I see is a mixed reintroduction. Again, I think in video 2 I talked about like trying some birthday cake and how that is, dairy, gluten, soy, corn, sugar, all things together. And that is not going to give you a clear picture at all. You're probably going to feel like crap afterwards, either immediately or a few days afterwards. But it's going to kind of blow your timeline for, unfortunately, having everything out. When you do the reintroduction phase, it is crucial that you do one thing at a time. And like in the last video I said, I'll kind of give you a little overview of the quantity and type of kind of pure food that you want to eat to test those things. I don't have that down for everything, but you do it as much as you can and as close as you can to that. And you have to eat a fair amount, right? So that is the other point, not eating enough of the food. Oh, I'll just kind of nibble here. I'll have a cracker at this social function. Oh, great, I'm totally fine with wheat. No. I wish it were that simple, but it's not. The whole point of reintroduction is to create a response. You have to give it a shot that way. And it's a bummer because it means that you might feel miserable. And that's a little bit hard to self-inflict. But, if you really want to eat that food again, or you really want to know if you're sensitive, it's worthwhile to test and to check in with, right? And that can happen right at that 6-week mark. It can happen later, and oftentimes what I see for people is that they reintroduce the foods at right at 6 weeks that they most want to test, right? That they're missing the most. So I think that's really important, is that you so the solution, right, is you follow the protocol completely, right? It's really, really important in the reintroduction to be very kind of strict and rigid with things. There isn't a lot of leeway, otherwise you're just not going to get clear results, which is exactly what you want to have, to know for sure. Not waiting at least 72 hours, right, where we talked about you need to wait at least 72 hours between foods to test to allow that inflammation level to come down or any reactivity to come down. Or you wait until your symptoms are gone, right? So you're not following your symptoms, rushing it, saying whatever, I just really want to test this food and I need to dive in. Not okay. It's just going to muddle your results. And again, there's so many things that can muddle it, your mood, your stress level, your immune system, what's going on. So you might not always have clear results, but that's also why it's really nice to keep that journal or diary of any symptoms that might pop up, and remember that they could be fully 72 hours delayed, so if you wake up feeling tired or lethargic, might have been the eggs yesterday, or 2 days later. And that's what's really interesting. You start to learn the patterns that you have with these particular foods. And that's really all this diet is about. We're learning how sensitive you are to things, and that's when you start to negotiate. You start to think, okay, well, maybe I can have this food once a week. Maybe it really needs to be out for a couple years for me to totally heal. That's really what we're doing here. We're understanding, the strength and depth of reaction that your body has to certain foods, and then it's up to you what you do with that information, right? Okay, right, so solution, follow the protocol and listen to your body, definitely. Okay, we're on to our last common misstep or mistake that people make on the elimination diet, or just the whole process here. Trusting test results, right? So in this way, I'm not talking about reintroduction test results, because those should be the most accurate of any test results you get. That if you've done it correctly and you've eliminated things for the full 6 weeks, and you've reintroduced one food at a time in a proper quantity, that will give you the clearest results possible. And hopefully you're not stressed and have had good sleep and all these other good things to decrease the inflammation level. So, but I'm talking more about the skin tests that you get from a Western allergy doc, or the RAST test, which is the blood test they do that tests IgE, right? Remember, those two tests only do IgE, which is the hypersensitivity, could be anaphylactic shock reactions with throat swelling, difficulty breathing, tongue and lip swelling, hives, that type of thing. So they are, and then also the IgG food allergy tests, which are food sensitivity tests. that you get from most naturopaths, right? That typically focus on testing IgG, which is that delayed allergic reaction bit. So that's where it can be delayed that full 72 hours or whatnot, just not that extreme reaction that the IgE is. Some naturopaths also test for IgG or IgA, but most of the time, they usually test for IgG. Sometimes they'll do IgE and IgA as well, but IgG is the most common. So the deal with that is that they're inaccurate and incomplete, right? The IgE tests really only test for those hypersensitivity anaphylactic reactions that most people know they have. So that's not super helpful, and it's a lot of money to get that testing done. Even the IgG, which are geared towards food sensitivities that are way more common than actual food allergies, they're still incomplete because it requires that direct antigen antibody immune response, and that is not how food intolerances work. They do not directly involve the immune system. They often indirectly activate the immune system, but they don't directly activate it. So the food allergy tests that you can get from your doctor or naturopath only test one part of the picture, right? They only test that direct immune response. The IgG test from your naturopath can be a great jumping off point, especially if you just kind of want to know and give yourself a little intro of possibilities. Just know that it is not the end all be all of what you might be sensitive to. So it's really important to realize those tests are not 100% accurate. It's very difficult, even with the IgG tests. There's so many different parts of the food that they could be testing. With an apple, is it the skin? Is it the internal part of the fruit beyond the skin? Was that an organic apple? Did it get all these molecules or samples from the apple as an accurate representation? Like, what part of that are you reacting to? And that's not super transparent with food allergy testing at this point. I'm sure it will get more and more transparent, and then we'll have some more information on like what is actually needed, what parts of the fruit, how to test it, that type of thing, and it varies widely from lab to lab. So there's a lot left to be desired in terms of food sensitivity testing, IgG wise, and of course, again, can give you a good starting point, but it is not the full picture and never will be. So looking at this with the testing, I mentioned this a little bit when we were talking about it in the first video, but so there's this psychological term that psychologists talk about as the external locus of control, that you are looking outside your body for the answer and outside yourself, and you're placing all of this value on that result and saying, that's really what's going to tell me the answer. And that's really how we've been conditioned in an allopathic or Western medicine viewpoint. We are conditioned to look to the doctor for those answers. They will always have the answers, or the imaging or the lab test will, and it will direct us to the right diagnosis and the right treatment. And that is just not how the body works a lot of the time. It's not. We don't fit into these perfect little boxes. And I think that's the real value of naturopathic medicine, is that as practitioners, we really use the gray area. We actually like it when you don't fit into those boxes, because that means you don't have this really severe pathology that's developed. You haven't ticked enough of those boxes to have this particular diagnosis and treatment. And as a patient, that can be very frustrating, but from my point of view, I love it. That is my bread and butter. That's my favorite thing and my favorite way to treat people. Because again, we've hit something before it's gotten that advanced. So anyway, this external locus of control, right? Just putting this value on what's outside of you to tell you what's wrong and what needs to happen. And that is a very, very disempowering message. That's saying that you are not smart enough to know, you're not powerful enough or intuitive enough to understand what your own body is telling you, and that you need somebody else to tell you. And again, that's the exact opposite message of naturopathic medicine. That's the opposite way of how I practice, and how most naturopaths practice. We really want to empower our patients so they can do the best they can for themselves. And that is really, really tough. Instead of looking outward, to turn that mirror around and look inward, or, to make it a mirror. So you look inward, essentially. you have to be willing to take this really deep look at yourself, right? And listen to what your body is saying, and these symptoms that maybe you've been ignoring for years or decades that you don't want to deal with, that, your body's silly and what's it doing? It's just stupid, because that's easier to think that, right? It's way easier to do that than to actually take ownership and responsibility for the fact that, wow, I am doing something that's really irritating my core, my GI, mentally and emotionally, all of this stuff, right? Because that's when you have to change. You start to, when you look inward, you have to take ownership, and then you have to change. Otherwise there's too much cognitive dissonance, which is another nice psychological term, where there's too much difference between these. You see these two realities and they don't match up, and cognitive dissonance is that really uncomfortable feeling that happens, and then it's very, very difficult to hold those two realities, so one ends up becoming the reality, and that's what you see. People either go towards stronger denial, that the body is stupid, it doesn't know what it's doing, it's definitely not foods, I'm just going to live with this, whatever, or they're like, wow, I really need to change and make this better for myself, and I'm going to start doing the hard work. And, it is really hard work. I totally understand that, and this is a lot to ask of yourself, but it's also massively rewarding, much more so than anything you could do by not paying attention or suppressing. You're really giving yourself a fighting chance by listening, right? So solution is to listen to your body and to respect your body. It is innately wise. It understands what's happening. It is creating symptoms for a reason, which is to get your attention. And then, it's your job to learn how to interpret that and to respect it and to figure out what it needs, and that's part of my job. I would say that's 90% of my job is just teaching people how to understand what their body is saying to them. And then over time, they learn and they don't really need my help as much anymore, which is like the best feeling ever. It's fabulous to have people who are self-sufficient in that regard. Okay, so my number one piece of advice, you might have guessed this already, is trust your body, which I have said a lot and just said a lot about, so I won't say too much more here, but it really is at the core of this entire food allergy, food sensitivity bit, because without an external test, and looking internally, you have to start to trust what it's saying. You have to start to think, wow, there's something to this, right? This headache that it's giving me, there's a reason for it, right? And that's a big jump when we've been conditioned not to think that way about the body. So it takes a while to really understand. And then it takes a while to understand what symptoms are good and what symptoms are bad and what's flared up and what might be just a healing crisis, which is a term in naturopathic medicine that I won't get into, but it usually means you're going to get better after you might have a flare-up of symptoms. So there's all these nuances to symptoms that happen, and it's a lot. It's a lot to navigate on your own, which is why it's lovely to have a natural healthcare practitioner to help you move through that. Online resources, books, all that good stuff. But yeah, you have to listen to it, right? And then be patient. Be patient with not only your body's ability to heal, which is often faster than we expect it will be, but be patient with yourself. I often find that it's not the physical that's dragging the progress back, it's the mental and emotional. It's the getting out of our own way to actually make the progress we need to make. Usually once we do that, our body just, bam, it just heals, and it's fantastic. And again, of course, that depends on your age and what else has been going on in your life and what's happening, but it is really inspiring when you finally move out of your own way, and you can see what happens. But that takes a lot of education, a lot of remembering to look inward, a lot of trusting your body, which again, we're not really conditioned to do. So I realize these are very difficult things, and I don't want to be flippant about it, and just kind of send you on your way without, trying to give you some more resources and great thought processes around it. So I really hope that I've done that in this series for you. I will have all of my resources listed below the video again, so you don't feel like you're out on your own doing this. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. If I'm not your direct healthcare practitioner, I might refer you to talk to your healthcare practitioner, but I can try to answer any questions I might have raised for you in these videos to the best of my ability. So again, yeah, I really hope that this inspires you to kind of maybe look at your body and your symptoms in a different way, and maybe look at those chronic long-term things that maybe you've associated with aging, or just I have this condition, therefore I have to live with this. That's not necessarily always true. If you can really reorient, give your body a chance to heal by removing some of this inflammatory load that we can expose ourselves to, right, through these food sensitivities and intolerances. Okay, well, I think that's it for me. Thanks so much. Take care. Kombucha, the naturopathic drink of champions. Little behind the scenes action. You can see where I've got this all set up in my office with my super cool tripod. And these are my lights that I use. I've got 2 of them pointed at me. They're pretty bright. And then I've got my third one to light up the background with my messy office, and propped up on the cat bed. You know, you gotta use what you have.